I met Cass up at the rally for Bears Ears. I was one of those that asked to be able to sing a song. And ever since then, this little gal is a pack of dynamite. She can do a lot of things. She's everywhere.
Oh, thank you, Larry. Hi. Um, it's really good to see a lot of people here. I'm impressed, and I'm glad. I think this is what we need. I think it's a great opportunity, learning opportunity, which to learn from different people, different backgrounds, different culture, and I think that's really needed in these difficult times. So thank you for coming. Thank you for taking interest in this beautiful film and Native American culture and our struggle. Um, I do have to say, looking through the crowd, I wish there was more young people here because I think that's really important. So for those of you young people who are here, thank you for coming. And so a little bit about me. I, um, I am from the largest Native American tribe, the Navajo tribe. We have over 300,000 members. Our Navajo Nation is about 17 million acres, over 17 million acres throughout the Four Corners region. I grew up in a town called Toba City, Arizona, and my mother raised 6 of us. She's Navajo and she speaks Navajo fluently. She raised us in a hogan, which is our traditional home. So I grew up very close to the earth, and we had a really strong relationship with Mother Earth in that way. So in our hogan, we didn't have any rooms or anything like that. We chopped our own woods. We didn't have running water or electricity. All of the people in my family spoke Navajo, and I grew up as hearing that as the first language in our family and understanding that as my first language. And so I grew up in that way, very close to the land. I mean, it's very unique. I don't know very many other people in the United States who grew up without running water or electricity, unless there's someone else in the crowd here. Anyone? But it's a very beautiful thing in retrospect because it's really the thing that has saved my life as a Native American woman. Um, what I mean by that is we have a lot of the way we identify ourselves is through our spirituality and our connection to Mother Earth. Um, and I think that growing up that way, it's really, really saved my life in a lot of ways because watching the video, you guys probably have seen some of the struggles that we have with the poverty levels. Our youth have a national average suicide rate of 4 times the national average. I've had to bury a lot of people in my family that are very young, way too soon. The average median wage or salary on the Navajo Nation is just over $21,000 a year. Um, but then there's a lot of good things that are happening on our Navajo Nation. We just we're going solar with our energy, switching the electric grid over to solar panels, which is a really awesome thing. We even tried to go wind. We tried to look into wind energy, which was amazing, and I hope that they continue to do that. But it's an interesting time. Just growing up this way on the Indian reservation, going to a boarding school, experiencing all these struggles and hardships of systems of oppression and racism has really, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's really, it's been hard. And there are times where I really contemplated taking my own life because I didn't feel like I belonged. Um, Everything about my identity, my language, um, our dances, our stories, all of these things were stripped from us when we were put into boarding schools and put onto these reservations. And it's not until recently, until I'm 32 now, but I look back on my life and I realize that I've had a hard life as a Native American woman in this country. And everything about a lot of the systems here were created to erase me as a person. And the only time I really felt like I belonged somewhere was when I actually went to the Standing Rock Sioux protests against Dakota Access Pipeline. And that, when I saw 500 tribes come together and stand in solidarity to protect the earth, is the first time I actually felt like I belonged somewhere as a Native American woman in this country. And so since then, I've reclaimed my power by reconnecting with my roots and my heritage through activism and protecting the land. You know, I do a lot of activism here in Salt Lake City and organizing for the community. And what I do specifically is I help elevate the Native American voice and around Native American issues. And we founded a nonprofit that's called Pandos here in Salt Lake City. It stands for Peaceful Advocates for Native Dialogue and Organizing Support. And what we do is we help organize in the community with other Indigenous-led groups, and we're building a collaboration to bring back traditional and ancient knowledge and wisdom of Native American culture. And specifically, what I've done is I've collected thousands and thousands of comments during the public comment period for Bears Ears National Monument. And I work with a lot of different tribes in the area, not only here locally, but across the United States. And then also I confronted the Secretary of Interior, Zinke, when he came here, which was interesting because he flipped, when I asked him why he wasn't meeting with tribes, he flipped around and shoved his fingers in my face and told me to be nice and not to be rude for asking a question. And that really sparked a flame in me because I'm like, I'm not here to be nice. I'm here to hold you accountable. You work. We need to remind these people that they work for us and that their salaries come from us and our taxes. And I think that it's an interesting time, what's going on right now, difficult times, because I think there's a lot of issues that we're in trouble as the human race. We really are. We have a potential of here, and we're performing down here. A lot of what we're doing is reactionary instead of proactive. And a war is being waged against us through capitalism, through pharmaceutical companies, through so many different ways, through our food. Our food is being poisoned. A lot of us are lost. And what really worries me is our younger generations, because never before have we had more means of technology and means of communication than we do now, but never before have I seen people more distant from each other and not being able to connect on an intimate level. So it's kind of a paradox. You know, when I look at my friends and I look at what's going on, a lot of them are behind the scenes of their laptops or their cell phones, you know, and a lot of this conversation is happening through technology and marketing. This is a very powerful thing because it's influencing our interaction and our behavior. When you look at technology and the way we communicate, you look at, Facebook, for example, the algorithms are set up in such a way that it kind of shapes and molds our thoughts and our emotions. And people hide behind screens. We can't sit across each other and have a conversation anymore. I don't know very many people who know how to do that. And also, I don't know very many people who wake up passionate every day, who are happy with their lives. I don't know if you guys know very many people that say, hey, I wake up every day happy. and I love what I do, I hardly know any of those people. So what I see also is that human beings are in a lot of pain, and the ones that are hurting the most are the marginalized communities, like our communities, who have a voice that is being suppressed actively. And it is our responsibility to each other to take care of one another and to lift those who don't have as big of a voice. The chief, I read this saying, one of the chiefs said, "You don't judge a civilization by how tall their buildings are, but rather how well the people relate to each other and their environment." And I see that there's a lot of people that are detached from our earth and our shared home. And because of that, because they don't know where they come from and appreciate where they come from, that's why we're in a lot of pain, because people are frantically searching outside of themselves for happiness, with money, with cars, with fancy house, with those new pair of shoes, objects, materialistic things. But the happiness that they have inside of themselves is, they're not looking inward for it. They're looking outside of themselves. And so I think I could go on about a lot of this stuff. But what I'm interested in is, you know, with the struggles that we have as marginalized communities, as Native American community, how do we come together moving forward in these difficult times? How do we start having conversation, meaningful dialogue, being able to sit across the table with people who are different from us and understanding each other? And I think a mindset is to start thinking about solutions, and solutions about in a way that we understand ourselves on an individual level, and also we understand the systems that affect us. I think the sooner that happens, the sooner we have an understanding and conscientious awakening of the dynamic between individual self and our environment and the systems that have an impact on us, and the sooner we can sit across each other and have that conversation, I think that's when actual change can occur. And I really am interested in that conversation, because I think as the human race, we're way behind. And we're in a lot of trouble because, you know, looking at climate change. I was just in Telluride, Colorado, visiting Ute country, and there's no snow. It's 65 degrees. We got no snow up in these mountains either. It's, what is it, November, almost December, and it's like 60-something degrees. I mean, we're hitting records of the highest temperatures we've ever had. I mean, is that normal? It's not normal. Abnormal, and a lot of our economy depends on it. And so that's what I have on my mind, is climate change as well. But
Thank
sorry.
you, Cass.
It took a lot.
You know, the screening is really ironic in that a couple days ago we've got the president who said the words Pocahontas. When I was in the Navy, I got called Geronimo, Cochise, Indian, and when I said my name, Cesspooch, it means white belly. My great-grandpa had a big white birthmark on his tummy, and that's what Cesspooch means in Ute. Well, I got called Cesspool, Cesspooch, all kinds of things. So Pocahontas is just same sort of thing. And back in my day, we had AIM. I went to the American Indian Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I came out of the Navy, and AIM was right there. So I shed all of the uniform and everything and stuck on my AIM clothes and started to march and protest. And today we have Moroni Benally, who is one of those, who would be one of those AIM leaders, but he does it in such a way. He can lash you with his tongue. He's a very knowledgeable man. And so Mr. Moroni, he's the co-founder of the Utah League of Native American Voters.
Thank you, Larry. That's very kind of you. Yat is a Moroni Benally in Chien, na Shashin Slindo, but Anibas Chindo, to a Hanaita Chedo, Tabaheta Chanela, Ekut altenensle, although a hen hanoya, I say he shik edo doshe, shitsilla, shik eight also a he hanoya. Thank you for coming tonight. Um, that's a very kind introduction, Larry. I probably would be with AIM had I lived in the 70s. I had so many thoughts going through my mind with this film. There's so much in terms of, I don't know much about, I know very little about the indigenous politics, Aboriginal politics of Canada and as it relates to First Nations. But the struggles are the same. And one of the things that I want to talk about just very specifically, because there's so many things that touched on. It touched on like the existential angst of like indigenous people trying to figure out who they are. It touched on how they figured out what relationality meant. It touched on the idea that you don't have to go out into nature. You don't have to actually put your feet in the sand and go hiking and camping to be connected to Mother Earth. It talked about all of these different ways of what relationality meant and how to be indigenous. And what it did for me in the end, I mean, I love bow ties, and apparently they do too, is it tried to like disrupt an image of what indigenous people ought to be. There's a filter most of America and Canada and Australia and most settler colonial states. Settler colonial states are basically are countries where Europeans came and settled permanently. And that has an impact. And it has an impact because once they settle permanently, they have to get rid of the people that were there before. They have to get rid of them physically. They have to get rid of them within their own imaginations. They have to get rid of them in policy. And so this boarding school stuff that we saw was all about that physical extermination. And if they couldn't physically exterminate them, it was termination, a termination of their identity. And that's what Cassandra was talking about in terms of erasure. And we see that constantly. I mean, even with Bears Ears right now, it's an impending move to actually shrink the size of the monument. But what it does, it erases the memories associated with that land. It disrupts those memories. And that kills the relationship. That is relationality. The land carries the memories. Memories are embedded in it. Standing Rock was about the memories and the spirit embedded in the water. And it was a disruption of that. That was an assault on relationality, which is sovereignty. And this entire film was talking about that. It was just, I mean, it was incredible. It talked about the indigenous existential condition, like what is happening right now in the lives of so many. It connected fishing rights to someone reconnecting to their indigenous past, their family. It found relationality in music because the music is the one that carries these memories. It connects us back to our ancestors. It reminds us where we came from. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. I've been doing a lot of work in the last couple of months writing on indigenous existentialism. I've been writing on relationality. I've been talking and giving lectures on these as well. And it's been on my mind because I keep thinking, like, what is this thing about resistance as well? And what is going on? And I reflected back on my time in Standing Rock, and I'm reflecting on this big protest that's going to happen on Saturday. And we talk about indigenous resistance. We talk about the resistance, right? And we saw all of this in this film. We saw all of these moments of resistance. And I had to step back. I'm like, what does that actually mean? What does indigenous resistance mean? When Native people stand in resistance to the Trump administration around Bears Ears, what does that actually mean? And so for me, like, I don't like being called an activist because that's not what I'm doing. What I feel doing the work that I'm doing, and what, if you even reflect back to many of the organizers of Standing Rock and many of the people who are working on behalf of tribal rights or what have you, they rarely call themselves activists. They call themselves, I mean, they may call themselves advocates, But they don't consider what they're doing as like direct action. They don't consider what they're doing as a standoff or a protest. What they see it as is ceremony. And we witnessed that. We saw it in this film. That entire film was ceremony. Because ceremony is about relationality. And that is the indigenous condition. It's not about the feathers. It's not about who can speak what language and whatever. It's about that relationality, that ability to connect back to who we were, to the roots, because radical means roots. And the memories, the songs, the prayers, the stories are embedded with memories, and that's what brings you back down. And that's regardless of whether one can speak their language or not. Their identity is outside of whether they can perform a specific ceremony. But what they have is access to those memories, that relationality, and that is what makes them indigenous. And that is what people, when they talk about activism, they refer to that. They're like, I'm doing this because I have to protect the memories for the future generations. Because they need to hear these stories and songs, not because singing them makes them indigenous, but because they need to feel the memories that are embedded within those prayers and those songs. And they need to feel that to give them hope as to moving in the future. And one of the things that one of the young ladies said is like, what she sees as an at-risk youth is someone who's culturally deprived. And I'm thinking, that's exactly right. Someone who doesn't have access to those stories and those prayers and those songs that connects them through those memories back to those roots. And if you ask activists, Native activists, why they're doing what they're doing, this is the far common denominator in all of them. That they call themselves water protectors because Toszan, in Navajo meaning water woman, is the embodiment of those stories in the water. And they have to protect that. Not just because we need clean water, sure, we need that, but to protect future generations and to ensure that they are not erased. Because there's policies all sorts of places. There's a policy of erasure happening with Bears Ears. Right now, I'm fighting against this tax reform bill because it's going to eliminate some credits, Medicare credits, because that's going to directly affect Indian health care. And that puts pressure on Native communities. That puts pressure on the ability to transmit those memories and those songs and prayers and perpetuate an indigenous future. I mean, you may not think Medicare is that important, but it is. I mean, we all get so excited because Bears Ears is so sexy. But this is part of the indigenous condition. Is doing so erases our immediate reality in all those other areas. When we don't talk about Medicare and health care, we're saying, oh, that doesn't matter. We're just interested in the feathers that are associated in Bears Ears. When we don't talk about the form, I think it's called a 506 form under the Impact A, Johnson O'Malley, that could allow Native youth right now to get more funding to overturn that dropout rate that Cassandra was talking about. When we're not fighting against that, we're turning our backs against the future generations, not allowing them access to those memories that we suppose that we're saying we're protecting when we speak about Bears Ears. And there's a whole slew of other issues. There's a water settlement, the Utah Navajo water settlement right now that's going before U.S. Congress. And it is rife with problems, but no one's talking about that. There's an epidemic of opiate use and meth use. There's an epidemic of sexual assault, and no one is talking about that. We want to protest Bears Ears because it's sexy. Not to say that Bears Ears isn't important, it is. But this film right now showed the immediate condition, the immediate indigenous condition, and showed them struggling of what it means to be indigenous, and then finding that it's rooted in the transmission of stories, prayers, and songs, because those stories, prayers, and songs are the mechanisms of relationality. Like I said, we don't need to go camping hiking, and whatever else people do in the outdoors to be connected to Mother Earth. Because she is in the stories and songs and prayers that were passed down to me. And these are the things that I saw from this film. I can go on, but I'll let Robert go on. Thank you.
All right. Very knowledgeable man. Next up, we have 100 years of, this past year, we've had Congressman Bishop who tried to do a land grab that hasn't been done for 100 years. And our next panelist is one of those leading protection of Ute lands, Robert Lucero.
Thank you, Larry, and I want to thank you. It's a great privilege to be here. Thank you, folks. It's a great privilege to be here through the Political Action Committee. When the Ute Indian Tribe Political Action Committee was founded in
the late summer of 2016, I got a phone call on my cell phone from Lee Davidson from the Salt Lake Tribune. Is he here today? But
he called me up and said, "So what's this about UtePAC and blah, blah, blah." So I talked to him, but then the next day the article said Ute Tribe launches a fight or launches an attack on Rob Bishop. And that was wrong, because the founding of UtePAC was established to fight back against Rob Bishop's attempt to take land through the Public Lands Initiative in 2016. That bill would have taken 100,000 acres away from the Ute tribe directly, and more than 500,000 acres away through what they called special management. So, I mean, and this is a case of the Utah representatives, whether federal, state, or local, as you see in San Juan County, for example, not listening to tribes, disrespecting tribes, lying about what tribes want. From what Moroni and Cassandra were saying in particular, that is one of the things that strikes me constantly, is the fact that there's not, these elected officials are just not listening to what tribes are saying are important to them, whether the leaders of the tribes, the delegated representatives of tribes, or tribal members. They determine from the outside what they want to say on behalf of tribes, or what they want to do if they're using tribal members as virtual props, as we saw yesterday with the president. From the film, I think I wanted to just point out a couple things that struck me in watching it. As Cassandra mentioned, it definitely is troubling, not just in this meeting, but I spent a lot of time in my hometown. I'm from Los Angeles originally, and I spent some time at the largest Democratic Party organization in the country, which is the Los Angeles County Democratic Party. So it's a very liberal place, of course. LA County, probably the most liberal as far as Hollywood and such. Their meetings of about 90 people, between 60 to 90 people, were all, average age was probably 70, because there were people in their 80s and 90s there, God bless them, and people in their 50s and 60s, but there were very few that were my age or younger in the audience. And I think it's instructive to look at this film from the standpoint of, when did this Native Brotherhood in British Columbia begin? 1931. Around the same time that you had the beginnings of the movement for what became the Indian New Deal in the United States, the 1934 Indian New Deal. That wasn't really just a product of FDR or John Collier. It was a product of folks that were actually in the Southwest trying to figure out how to help folks in New Mexico and other parts get true representation and justice. So you see this movement throughout the 30s, 40s. 1946, you have the founding of this Native Voice newspaper. I don't think it's a coincidence that it's right after the end of World War II, where people were really ripe to fight fascism, okay? And one of the tricky things that you know, if you keep following that timeline, in my view as a political organizer, I agree with Moroni that I don't like to be called a protester or an activist. I've been a professional political organizer for almost 25 years now. But as a political organizer, I look at one of the examples of an individual, a leader from a movement who really did get to the mountaintop, and that was Dr. Martin Luther King. And I really like to think about him a lot because I'll just give you a couple of examples from thinking in this movie. What they did in this movie was this Constitution train that they had and the movement that you had with that gentleman's ancestor that they had the old footage of, they had figured out that they already had the rights that they wanted to exercise. It was already documented. It was already there. It was already legal. So just like the March on Washington in '63, August of '63, when Dr. King said, we're here to cash a check. We have this check called the Constitution. We have this check called the Declaration of Independence. It belongs to us. We are men as well as described in the founding documents, male and female human beings, right? The same concept is in this film, in my view, of the fact that natives understood before first contact that they were human beings, that there was a creator and they were human beings, because human beings understand that about ourselves. And ironically enough, the problem with Dr. King for the establishment was that he assimilated too well. He got too good at being a constitutional expert, an American, quote unquote. Especially when he said what he said in 1967 about the Vietnam War. He was dead on if you read that speech or listen to it. You know, and that got him killed. You know, he stepped out of his bounds, okay? And I bring that up because what was back then the black American or the American Negro was a victim of full erasure, right? They had, however, developed a sense that, no, this Constitution belongs to us. This American Revolution belongs to us, so let's go claim it. And they were stopped for that. The Indian New Deal represented a similar kind of thing. The fight we're involved in today with the work that we're doing, we have a political action committee for the Ute tribe. We have a few other initiatives for 2018 that people like Orrin Hatch and Rob Bishop won't like as well. But the idea is we're not here begging for scraps at the back door. We're here telling you this Constitution applies to us as well. In the American Constitution, it's written into the original Constitution that tribes are sovereign. So our job, I know my job with the UtePAC, is to hold these elected officials accountable in the way that Cassandra mentioned, that they work for us and they work for these principles that we understand as well.
Awesome. A little bit about myself. I grew up on the Ute Reservation. It's about 3 hours away from here out in Uinta Basin. Utah was named after our Ute people. Spaniards called us Utah. And we were relocated there once we were in the way here. And so that's where we reside today. I grew up there and went into the Navy in 1970. I was a radioman with an air squadron. We flew C-2 cargo planes, same as the one we lost here a couple days ago with 10 sailors. And we flew out to the carriers off the coast of Da Nang there at Yankee Station every day with cargo, packs, and mail. And that's where I was called Indian, Geronimo, Cochise, all those names. When I got out of the military, I went to the Institute of American Indian Arts and got into communications media. And I realized then what power a film had, because it could make somebody cry one minute and make you laugh the next. So I went on to film school in Santa Fe. And I returned back home in '79 to start one of the first production companies for any of the tribes in the States. And we produced films there from '79 to '02. And one of the projects I'm working on now is called YouTube, where all of those films will be online. So look for those probably the end of, well, maybe about springtime. We'll have youtube.com online. And you can see not only those films, but you'll see our photo archive. It will be the main source of our Ute people, resources there. And, but our native people were right brains, so we're visuals and we learn by what we see. And so film is a great medium for us to use. And of course, you see a lot of films now coming through Sundance. My first film in Sundance was in '94, and I've been part of the Sundance family since. So I'm very happy to be here with you tonight and to moderate this panel and this awesome film. A couple of the ladies, the singers there, are part of Eulalie, if you didn't recognize them. And so, yes, music is what we used in Close Encounters of the Third Kind to communicate with the extraterrestrials. So it's universal, and so it touches everybody, everything. So with that, I'd like to say tapoyak, thank you and good night. Q&A? Okay. Sure. We're open for a few questions if you'd like.
Okay, so I would say Indigenous Rising Media is a really good reference. They talk a lot about moving forward in the future and looking at renewable alternative energy for a better quality of life and the significance behind with sovereignty in relation to that. Also, you can just Google really any kind of Native American media. There's a lot of podcasts that are online as well. If you just search, follow Pandos, our nonprofit. We usually share a lot of information about Native American issues and try to help elevate the issues that our communities are faced with. So you can follow us on Facebook, Pandos, it's Pandos. And then there's also some other organizations here that are more grassroots, like UtePAC. That's a great organization to follow as well, Utah League of Native American Voters. I think I'm putting these references out there and UtePAC because we're local and we're grassroots and we care about issues facing our communities locally. And I think sometimes that's where we need to put our focus is in our own communities. Moroni, do you have Indigenous Rising Media?
Any more questions? Yes.
And standing off one year.
Speak up so we can hear you in the back.
I'm sorry. I'm a veteran, and we about 10 of us went to Standoff. And what struck me really hard in a lot of cases was really interesting to see natives one-on-one together, especially
When we're in there in the casino, and the only time I see a native in Utah is when graduate at a store, and this is really a changing experience. We had the round dance and the connections of the native veterans and so on. The two other veterans in my van, and I really started listening to the stories. One was a Dene brother from Navajo. He keeps on talking about the struggles that they're going on in the res. He wasn't more concerned about what we're doing. We're going to Cannonball. He kept on talking about the struggles, but he's going in the res. The other Dene brother, a young guy, Afghan vet, And he said the first thing his mother told him is get off the res. Don't end up like the other youth who are faced with meth and drugs and gangs. And he said that was probably the best thing that happened to him. So those are kind of two struggles. And then I saw the movie. I highly recommend to see this movie called Wind River. It is strong about what's going on. It's showing people and how these man camps go ahead and rape Native women and so on. So my experience, I relate to when I saw that, so on. And I have no question, maybe someone give an explanation of what's really happening on the res, because we of white privilege don't experience this, and we can go and, yeah, you're right, bears are sexy and all that, but where's the real struggle?
Thanks, Bart. Can I respond to that? One of the things that I also do, which I don't get well liked for, is disabusing notions of indigeneity that most people have. And what I mean by disabusing is trying to set the record straight. Yeah, there is this narrative that tribes are horribly impoverished and all of these horrible conditions. That's the narrative. That is the national narrative going around. I grew up in the Navajo Nation. I grew up without running water and electricity as well, all the way into my 20s. But I worked for the Navajo Nation. I worked for the president of the Navajo Nation. I was a division director for natural resources for the Navajo Nation. I did a lot of work on behalf of the Navajo Nation. I was the vice president of Tribal College. And the thing is, like, yeah, we have those things, but that's not who we are. Yeah, there's poverty. Doesn't mean we're poor. Yeah, there's drug addicts out there, but that's not who we are. And I get so tired of this, what I call poverty porn, that is presented about reservations and tribes. That's not who we are. Yeah, we have struggles, and we struggle against an entire government that seeks to erase who we are and replace our identity, that restrict our identity to blood quantum, that does all of these things to us, that tries to take away our sacred sites, that tries to defund our education, that tries to take away help for our elderly, and all of which are predicated on treaty promises and obligations. That is the struggle. It's not necessarily the opiate epidemic. It's not the suicide rate. Those are consequences of the government not living up to their obligations. And so we are on the reservation in the Navajo Nation. Just one quick story. When I was with the president of the Navajo Nation, we went to see some senators. And we met with them, and we talked with them about certain funding. The staff was so dismissive of us, and the senator was equally dismissive. And this man who was elected president was not the most popular person ever. But as I said before, he knew where he came from, and he knew why he was doing what he was doing. And excuse the language, but this is, quote, "Damn it, may God strike you down to hell with lightning if you don't live up to your treaty obligations." Slammed his hand on the table, and he got up and walked out of the room. If we're talking about the site of real struggle, that's where it is. It's not all of these are consequences of a government and a people not living up to their promises. We gave up our land. We had to put down, Navajos had to put down our weapons to be released from a concentration camp to return to our land. We signed that with very specific provisions on everything, less than a quarter of those, and yet we still fight for those. So, I mean, I just wanted to disabuse this notion that we are all struggling. There is an incredible number of strong, resilient people who never back down. I remember sitting in a chapter meeting with this elderly Navajo woman. This chapter meeting is like a town hall. Elderly Navajo woman. She never hadn't had formal schooling. But we were talking about changing our Navajo, our place name back into Navajo. And she stood up and gave the most eloquent analysis of colonization I have ever heard in my entire life. And she's the one that the senior citizens of the Navajo Nation send to DC to advocate on their behalf every year. And she is more effective than any political organizer, activist I have ever seen. and she doesn't speak a word of English because she knows who she is. And she doesn't talk about how impoverished things are. She doesn't talk about how 80% of the senior citizens live in substandard housing. She talks about her power of who she is. And so we have to remember that. Yeah, we're poor, or yeah, there's poverty, but we're not poor.
I want to respond. Yeah. I love that. And I'm going to, never before have we been stronger. You know, we've been here for centuries. We've been here for much longer than anybody else. We've been through, with all the presidents, we'll still be here. We're not going anywhere. We know how to survive in the worst conditions. Our very existence is resilience. We have and possess ancient wisdom and knowledge that no one can take from us. I mean, we have our moccasins, our ceremonies, our stories, our creation stories, our sash belts, our rug dresses, our prayers that a lot of people in this country do not have. A lot of the people in this country do not know where they come from. But we have things that we can touch and feel that have been passed down to us for generations, for longer than anybody that has ever been here. We have ancient wisdom and knowledge that's much older than anyone who has ever been here. And we're going to survive. We'll still be here. We'll always be here. There's going to come a time when people are going to look to us for survival. You know, when me and Moroni are sitting here talking about, we know what it's like to live without running water and electricity. When shit hits the fan, I know how to survive off the land. So we have a younger generation that is very powerful, and they started the biggest civil rights movement since AIM, the Standing Rock Dakota Access Pipeline. The youth started that. And we are a force to be reckoned with. We're only going to rise up. We're not going anywhere. We're only going to get stronger. So while we do struggle a lot of us are becoming educated. A lot of us are organizing and rallying and collaborating and inviting people to the table to have conversation about how we get along and how do we start protecting our shared home. It's no longer about differences. If you're smart, you'll recognize that. It's about how do we provide a better quality of life for all of us while respecting our differences. And that's a conversation that really needs to start happening.
Yes, up there.
You, as a vanguard, a spearhead that's been sharpened and honed over centuries to help lead a defense against those takeovers. And to take words from the film, that if you believe those lands are native lands and need to be protected, if you believe that that should be stopped, can you just take those lands, occupy those areas, and not move back from what Trump has planned to diminish? Hold those areas, and others will join you. Others will help take up that fight and say, no, no more backing down.
Offer a comment on that. First of all, I understand your sentiment, and Moroni and Cassandra and Larry can answer part of that as well. But I would like to say one thing, which is all of these politicians are extremely arrogant and foolish with what they're doing. From Trump to Zinke to Herbert to the congressman to Senator Hatch. And Rob Bishop is so much of an arrogant fool that he had to admit in his bill, this Congress, 2017, his bill to change the Antiquities Act, to basically do away with it, he had to admit that the current Antiquities Act doesn't allow a president to change a monument. Therefore, in the new bill, which isn't really going anywhere, but his new bill, he wants to give the president the authority to reduce monuments and so forth. So Sean Cesspooch, who was the chairman of the tribe last year and is still on the business committee, and is the representative from the Ute tribe to the Intertribal Coalition on Bears Ears, he's made the point, 2 points. He's made the point, number one, it's already our monument. It's already ours. Our government, our president our last president, the 44th president, Obama, gave that monument to the people of the United States, a national monument. Not a Utah monument, a national monument. So all the input from the nation counts. The second point that the chairman makes is that we don't come to battle anymore with guns on horses or, bow and arrow, he said. We go in the courts. So there is going to be a court battle, but the reason there's a court battle is because we've already taken it. It already is ours. The rally on Saturday, in my opinion, is to reaffirm it is ours already.
Oh.
The native voices have spoken, despite them being ignored by fools like Herbert. I mean, these are foolish people. They really are. I mean, what political amateurs, It's such a good old boys club that they don't realize all they do is please each other. It's kind of gross, So, it's really, come on now. What'd you say? Well, I appreciate that. But for now, we'll definitely just keep on this battlefield. But again, they really have a lot of egg on their face. They don't know what they're doing. I think your sentiment is right, but it is worth realizing we already did take it. We already have used our power, right? So, those are my thoughts.
I guess they want me to respond as well. So the first thought I had was, I'm actually writing, I'm sorry, I'm an academic. And so I'm writing this paper called Indigenous Radical Pragmatism. And what I mean by that, and what I'm actually writing gets to your point, is why have so many of these, the question I had is why have so many of these indigenous radical groups sort of failed in their objectives? And why is that the case? And so oftentimes people will pinpoint and say, oh, it's the leadership within that thing that's the reason for failure. But I'm saying, well, that could be, but these groups, including like the tribes, are going up against a monumental political and legal institution that is incredibly hard to change. And if we take the route of just not engaging that institution, we are bound to fail in achieving any objective. And so the reality for me then is being pragmatic and say, yes, we can have people on the ground, but we have to engage that political entity, and we do that through the court. There is so much precedent legally to show that the tribes will win this. So much. I mean, Montana tried to do that and they lost. President, I don't know which president it was, but you probably remember, there was a monument, a national monument in Montana that tried to happen. It lost. There's tremendous precedent. And right now, I mean,
Trump hates the courts. He hates federal
absolutely. And Trump, this administration doesn't understand that the judiciary is a part of the Constitution. So that's the point, is like, indigenous people, when they struggle, they're struggling on two fronts. One, to get the favor of the people. They're struggling to protect whatever it is they have, but they're also struggling in the political and legal realm. And very few people understand exactly what's going on. And just because, by the sheer fact that I had spent time working with the Navajo Nation, I spent times behind closed doors doing negotiating. I helped with a negotiation with Chevron when they're trying to close the coal mine in the Navajo Nation. I sat with BHP and Southern Edison as they were trying to do coal mining in the Navajo Nation yet again, behind these closed doors with like federal officials. And tribes have incredibly smart lawyers. Most of them are native, and the reason why they're smart is because They have a relationship with the land. They are connected through the songs and prayers, and they will protect it to the bitter end. Right now, the Navajo Nation Attorney General is I think she's a summa cum laude Harvard Law School graduate. She's Navajo, and she will fight to the bitter end for that bear's ears. So I'm not worried. And I mean, it'd be nice to have another big gathering down there, but I think we're well taken care of.
What I want to say is you have to understand, and on the subject of bears ears, that's just one battle. It's took almost a decade to get that much land of this earth protected. And it was very meticulous process, well thought out, researched, data collected, artifacts identified, sacred burial sites identified, land mapped and scaled. These tribes had to do things 100 times better than anybody else because they were watched like a hawk. It doesn't just come down to Monday Trump showing up thinking he can, shrink the monument. No. These tribes are the descendants of warriors, very strategic, very well thought out and planned. You don't get to protect 1.35 million acres of Mother Earth by just showing up one day and rallying people with horses and guns, and it's not like that anymore. So this fight was planned long before Trump ever became president. So our battles are now in the courtroom. Our battles are now with words and with law. And like Moroni is saying, we have people that have been fighting this fight for a very long time. And more importantly, I think something that I want to extend to you guys in the audience is to really think about how you can engage yourself on an individual level to support the tribes and to get behind our stewardship of the land and our knowledge and our wisdom. I mean, this is nothing that we haven't been saying before anyone got here. We've been saying the same thing. And look at what our nation has come to. Look at the president of the United States. He's a hot mess. And so you can support us by following our stewardship and respecting what the tribes of this area, the people of this area, the ancient people of this area have been asking for a long time. It's time. It really is. It's well overdue. Because clearly the situation now is not working.
I also think only Cliveden Bundy and his family would get away with occupying that way.
Well, with that, we're going to wrap up this evening. I want to thank the panel. I want to thank the Utah Film Center for asking us to be a part of this great film. And thank you all for coming out tonight. Well.